Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm 27 years old. For years, I promised myself one thing. Never again would I let my heart get tangled with someone from work. Office romances were messy, complicated, and dangerous. I'd already learned that lesson once, and it had left a scar deep enough to keep me cautious. My days were all the same. Endless rows of reports, meetings that seemed to multiply on their own, emails that stacked up like bricks in a wall. I would walk the same sterile corridors, greet the same faces, drink the same coffee that always tasted slightly burnt. My life had become a rhythm of routine, predictable, safe, even if a little hollow. And then she appeared. It was a Monday morning, the kind of morning that felt heavier than usual, when the manager introduced a new hire during our weekly meeting. She walked in with calm confidence, though there was something soft in the way she smiled, something that immediately cut through the gray monotony of the office air. She took a seat a few desks away from mine, and although we exchanged no more than a polite nod that day, I felt the air shift. I didn't realize it at first, but her presence began to ripple through my carefully constructed walls. I would catch myself glancing toward her desk when I should have been focused on spreadsheets. A simple exchange of words at the printer lingered longer in my mind than any meeting could. Soon, work after hours no longer felt like a burden. At first, we stayed behind only to finish projects, but those late evenings slowly transformed. One day, it was helping each other with reports. The next, it was coffee in the quiet office kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator replacing the buzz of daytime chatter. Our conversations stretched longer, slipping into personal stories, childhood memories, even silly jokes that made us laugh louder than we should have in such an empty space. Somewhere between those evenings, I realized I thought more about her than about my own assignments. Her laughter replayed in my head while I tried to focus on deadlines. The way she looked at me, curious, attentive, made me forget I had once sworn never to fall into this kind of situation again. And then came that night. The office emptied as usual, fluorescent lights dimmed, and we walked out together into the cool air. It had rained earlier, and the streets glistened under the street lamps. She suggested we walk instead of taking the bus, and I agreed without hesitation. The city felt quieter than usual, our steps echoing softly against the wet pavement. We talked about everything and nothing, laughing at childhood stories, pausing to listen to the rain. And then, under a flickering streetlight, as the drizzle thickened into steady drops, she looked at me in a way that made the world stop. Her hand brushed against mine, maybe accidental, maybe not, but the spark was undeniable. In that silence, heavier than words, I understood. Something had changed forever. There was no going back. That night, walking home in the rain, I couldn't stop replaying the moment under the streetlight. The office, the reports, the deadlines, all of it faded into nothingness. It was just her and me, the quiet city around us, the soft patter of rain acting like a drumbeat to something new, something unpredictable. The next morning, we returned to the office, as if nothing had happened. She smiled politely when we passed each other in the corridor, and I returned the smile, but inside me, everything had shifted. Every glance, every casual brush of hands, felt loaded with unspoken meaning. We were in the same space, surrounded by colleagues, but it felt as if the world had shrunk to just the two of us. We began to find small ways to be near each other. A shared coffee at the machine, a quick joke across the desks, lingering just a second longer than necessary in the break room. Sometimes I caught her looking at me when she thought I wasn't noticing, her eyes bright, questioning, inviting. I felt the pull of something stronger than friendship, stronger than curiosity. And yet, fear lingered. This was the office. Boundaries were expected. What if someone noticed? What if I ruined everything? But each time I thought of stepping back, I felt a strange reluctance, almost like some invisible thread kept pulling me closer to her, no matter how hard I tried to resist. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between us became a quiet rhythm. Meetings, emails, presentations, everything was now a backdrop to this delicate, unspoken connection. Sometimes, we stayed later than necessary, finishing work side by side, pretending the office was empty while secretly cherishing the stolen moments. I began to notice little things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she concentrated, the way her laughter filled the space and made the fluorescent lights seem warmer. One evening, after everyone had left, I found myself walking her to the door again. The rain had started up, soft at first, then heavier, and the city smelled of wet asphalt and something unfamiliar, exciting. Without thinking, I suggested we walk a little longer, just to enjoy the rain, and she agreed with that quiet smile that always made my chest tighten. We wandered through the streets, sharing stories and memories, laughter mingling with the steady rhythm of raindrops. At some point, we slowed, and the world seemed to hush around us. Under another streetlight, her hand brushed mine again. This time, it lingered. My heart raced, my thoughts scattered. We didn't speak, but the silence spoke louder than words ever could. In that instant, I understood. This was more than a spark, more than a fleeting attraction. Something had awakened between us, fragile but undeniable, and neither of us could ignore it. After that night, everything changed. Not openly, not dramatically. The office still hummed with its usual rhythm of emails and deadlines, but for us the world had shifted. Every glance, every small gesture carried weight. A brush of her hand when passing by, a laugh that lingered a second too long, a shared silence at our desks. They all meant more than either of us admitted. I found myself thinking about her constantly. Not just the big moments, but the small ones. The way she stirred her coffee, the tilt of her head when she concentrated, the soft sigh she let out when a spreadsheet refused to balance. I started to notice how her presence could make a dull task feel bearable, even enjoyable. And yet, there was fear, a quiet, nagging fear that something would break, that someone would notice, that I would lose control over the carefully constructed boundaries I had built around my life. Every late evening spent together carried a thrill and a tension, as if we were teetering on the edge of something forbidden yet irresistible. We began to talk more outside of work. Coffee breaks stretched into long walks, walks into shared dinners. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how effortlessly she fit into my world, as though she had always belonged. She asked questions that made me think, comments that made me laugh, and every interaction left me wanting more. One night, after finishing a project that had consumed us for days, we lingered in the office long after everyone had gone. The fluorescent lights cast a soft glow, and the empty desks felt intimate in a strange, quiet way. We talked about childhood dreams, embarrassing moments, and future plans, laughing at the absurdity of life. And then the conversation paused, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Her eyes met mine, searching, questioning, and I knew we both felt it. The connection that had been simmering quietly between us had ignited. She moved slightly closer, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her. Words became unnecessary. Our hands found each other's, this time deliberately, and the simple touch sent a shock through me that I could neither control nor resist. It was in that moment, standing in the middle of an empty office, that I realized there was no turning back. The rules I had followed for so long, the promises I had made to myself, were meaningless compared to the force of what was unfolding. I didn't know where it would lead, whether it would end in heartbreak or something extraordinary, but I knew that whatever it was real, and real was worth the risk. The days that followed were a delicate balance. We returned to the office, carefully masking our growing closeness behind professional smiles and polite nods. To anyone observing, we were just colleagues, nothing more. But beneath the surface, a quiet tension hummed between us, subtle yet undeniable. Every shared glance, every brush of hands over a stack of papers, carried the weight of what we had discovered in the empty office that night. I began to notice how my entire day revolved around her. Mornings felt heavier when I didn't see her first. Lunches felt incomplete if we didn't exchange a few words. Even trivial emails became a source of joy when her reply appeared, full of warmth and subtle humor. Work was no longer just work. It was a shared space where we danced around boundaries, testing limits without ever crossing them outright, at least not openly. One rainy evening, the office emptied faster than usual. She lingered near her desk, her hair damp from the drizzle outside, her jacket still clutched around her shoulders. I debated whether to leave, to avoid the temptation that always accompanied these late nights, but something in me refused. I wanted to stay, just to be near her, even in silence. We ended up walking together again, the rain soft against our faces. The city smelled of wet asphalt, and the lamplight reflected off puddles, creating a world that felt both familiar and magical. Conversation flowed easily, laughter breaking through, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper, a quiet acknowledgement of the growing bond that neither of us dared to name aloud. At one point, we stopped under a streetlight to avoid the heavier rain. She looked at me, and this time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Her hand reached for mine, and we held it firmly, deliberately. The world seemed to pause around us. The distant hum of traffic, the patter of raindrops, even the cool wind felt secondary to the warmth between our fingers. I realized then that the office, the rules, the careful facades we maintained, they no longer mattered. This connection, fragile yet fierce, was becoming the center of my life. Every heartbeat, every thought seemed to orbit around her presence. I didn't know how this would end, or if it would survive the scrutiny of our colleagues, but I didn't care. Some things are worth the risk. Some moments are worth stepping into the unknown. That night, walking home under the soft rain, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. And for the first time, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, breaking my own rules was exactly what I needed. The following week, the tension between us grew, subtle but impossible to ignore. Sitting across from her in meetings, I noticed the way her eyes would find mine, even when the discussion was mundane. She smiled at a joke only I seemed to catch, and my chest tightened each time. The office felt smaller, confined, as if it couldn't contain the quiet energy simmering between us. I started arriving early, just to catch her before the day began. We shared coffee in the break room, our conversations lingering longer than necessary, skirting around topics that hinted at the personal, the intimate. Every word carried weight. Every laugh felt like a secret shared. I found myself counting the minutes until she appeared at her desk, wondering what small gesture she would make, what unspoken message I might decipher. One evening, we stayed late again. The office lights dimmed, the hum of computers quiet, and the corridors echoed with our footsteps. We worked in companionable silence for a while, and then, almost instinctively, she leaned back in her chair and stretched, letting out a soft sigh. "I'm glad you stayed," she said, her voice low, almost vulnerable. Something in her tone made me pause. I wanted to tell her everything, that I thought about her constantly, that the world seemed brighter whenever she was near, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, letting the silence carry the meaning. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. After we finished our work, we walked out together, the evening air cool against our skin. Rain had left the streets slick and shining, reflecting the city lights. Without thinking, I suggested a longer route home. She agreed, her smile lighting up the dim street like a small beacon. We wandered through quiet streets, talking about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, dreams, fears. Everything spilled out naturally, unguarded. And then, under a flickering streetlight, she paused, her hand brushing mine. This time, there was no hesitation. Our fingers intertwined, warm and deliberate. I felt the spark again, stronger this time, as if the world itself had shifted around us. We walked the rest of the way in silence, but the quiet was full of meaning. Every step, every heartbeat, echoed the truth we both understood. Things had changed irrevocably. What we shared was fragile yet undeniable, a secret suspended between caution and desire. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I didn't care. Some moments are meant to be lived, not overanalyzed. That night, I went home with a restless mind and a heart pounding in ways it hadn't for a long time. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't stop thinking about her. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The next few days were a delicate dance. We were careful in the office, cautious of every glance, every touch, yet it was impossible to hide the connection entirely. I noticed her lingering near my desk more often, the subtle brush of her hand on a stack of papers, the way her laugh seemed to find me even across the room. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I found myself daydreaming about her during meetings, her voice replaying in my head long after the discussion had ended. The line between professional and personal blurred with each passing day, and I knew we were skating dangerously close to the edge. But the thought of stepping back felt impossible. The pull between us was magnetic, unavoidable. One late evening, after finishing a particularly grueling report, she asked if I wanted to walk a bit in the rain. I didn't hesitate. The rain was gentle, the streets glowing under the streetlights, and the city felt strangely intimate. As we walked, we talked about things we had never shared with anyone else, dreams we kept secret, fears we never voiced, memories too personal to mention in passing. At some point, we stopped under a streetlight to catch our breath. The raindrops fell softly around us, and I felt the world contract to just the two of us. Her eyes met mine, searching and vulnerable. I felt a rush of emotion I could no longer contain. She reached for my hand, and our fingers entwined as if they had always belonged together. The touch sent a jolt through me, igniting something I hadn't felt in years. It was more than attraction. It was connection, understanding, and the unspoken acknowledgement that we were no longer just colleagues. In that moment, I realized that whatever this was real, fragile, and beautiful. We walked the rest of the way in silence, our hands still linked, each of us lost in our own thoughts, yet perfectly aware of the other. When we finally parted at my apartment door, we hesitated, lingering in the quiet night. Our eyes met, and without a word, I understood that this was only the beginning of something neither of us could predict, but both of us desperately wanted. That night, lying in bed, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The office, the rules, the careful masks, they no longer mattered. All that mattered was her, and the fragile, thrilling connection that had taken root between us. The days after that night were electric, charged with a tension neither of us could ignore. Every shared glance across the office felt like a secret signal, every accidental touch sparking thoughts that lingered long after. The mundane rhythm of work had transformed into a delicate game, a mix of restraint, longing, and unspoken understanding. I began to notice the little things about her even more. The way her hair caught the light in the morning, the subtle curl of her smile when she was amused, the gentle way she leaned forward when concentrating. Each detail became a tiny thread weaving her presence into the very fabric of my day. We found reasons to linger after work more often. Sometimes it was to finish projects, other times it was just to share a quiet cup of coffee in the empty office kitchen. Those moments, though simple, felt sacred, a world separate from deadlines, meetings, and the watchful eyes of colleagues. One evening, as we were packing up our things, she suggested walking through the city again. It had been raining lightly, the streets reflecting the glow of neon lights. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something fresh, something that felt like possibility. We walked side by side, sometimes talking, sometimes just listening to the rain. And then, without warning, she stopped and looked up at me. The expression in her eyes was a mixture of anticipation and vulnerability, and I felt my own pulse quicken. "I don't want this to stay unspoken," she said softly, her hand brushing against mine. I didn't need words. I leaned closer, letting our fingers entwine, and the city around us seemed to vanish. In that quiet, rain-soaked moment, the unspoken became undeniable. The distance between us disappeared, replaced by a fragile, beautiful certainty. From that night on, everything shifted. We returned to work the next day, smiling politely at colleagues, hiding the small, stolen glances that now meant everything. But behind the professional facade, a new rhythm had taken hold. Every interaction, every moment together, carried the weight of a growing intimacy, one that neither of us could ignore. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that this connection, fragile, dangerous, and exhilarating, was changing the course of my life. Weeks passed, and the subtle tension between us had transformed into something undeniable. Every day brought new moments of connection, quiet smiles across the office, brief touches when handing over documents, shared laughter that echoed longer than it should have. Even the most mundane tasks were infused with meaning when we were together. We began spending more intentional time together outside of work. Sometimes it was a casual coffee after hours, other times a long walk through the city streets, rain or shine. Each moment felt like stepping into a world separate from deadlines and meetings, a world where only the two of us existed. One evening, after a particularly long day, she invited me to sit on a bench in a small, quiet park near the office. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the wet pavement, and the distant hum of the city was comforting rather than intrusive. We talked about our lives, dreams, and regrets, everything that had shaped us into the people we were. Her voice was gentle, almost hesitant at times, and I could feel the depth of her emotions mirrored in my own. When she reached for my hand, our fingers intertwined naturally, as though they had been waiting to find each other. The warmth of her touch was grounding, and I realized I had been craving this connection far longer than I had admitted to myself. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where she wasn't just a fleeting presence in my life. I thought of mornings spent together, shared coffee breaks, laughter spilling into evenings, and quiet moments of comfort and understanding. The thought was intoxicating, yet terrifying. It meant taking a risk, exposing myself to vulnerability I had long avoided. But as I looked at her, silhouetted in the soft glow of the park's lamplight, I knew that the risk was worth it. Whatever lay ahead, heartbreak or happiness, this connection was too real, too important to ignore. And in that moment, standing there with her hand in mine, I understood that some stories are meant to be lived fully, without hesitation, without fear. By now, our connection had grown stronger, more intimate, yet still hidden behind the walls of the office. Each day was a delicate balance of professionalism and longing, and every stolen glance, every accidental touch felt electric. It was a thrilling tension, one that kept me awake at night, replaying moments over and over in my head. We started sharing more personal stories, opening up about our pasts in ways we hadn't dared before. I learned about her childhood, her dreams, her fears, the small, delicate details that made her who she was. And she learned about me, the parts one usually kept hidden, the doubts, the quiet moments of insecurity, the dreams I'd almost forgotten. With every conversation, every laugh, every shared silence, we were weaving a bond that felt unbreakable. One rainy evening, after finishing a late project, we walked together through the empty streets. The rain had slowed, leaving puddles that reflected the streetlights like tiny galaxies on the ground. We talked about everything and nothing, our hands brushing, fingers occasionally intertwining, testing the boundaries of what was acceptable, yet feeling entirely natural. When we reached a quiet square, she stopped and looked at me. Her eyes were soft, searching, full of a vulnerability that made my chest ache. "I don't want to pretend anymore," she whispered. I didn't reply with words. I reached for her hand, holding it firmly, letting the connection speak for both of us. The silence was full of meaning, full of promise, full of the kind of understanding that can't be expressed in ordinary conversation. In that moment, I realized we had crossed the line between fleeting attraction and something far more profound. This was no longer just a secret, a stolen moment in the office. This was real, fragile, thrilling, and irreversible. And even though I couldn't predict what the future held, I knew I wanted her in it, whatever it might bring. Walking her home that night, the city around us blurred into insignificance. The office, deadlines, and careful rules no longer mattered. All that mattered was us and the quiet, powerful bond that had formed between two people who had once been strangers. After that night, everything felt different. The office remained the same on the surface, emails, meetings, deadlines, but for us, the world had shifted. Each glance, each smile, each brush of hands carried the weight of what had grown between us. We no longer needed words to understand each other. Our connection had become its own language. We continued our careful dance at work, masking our feelings behind professionalism. But outside those walls, the world belonged entirely to us. Walks in the rain, quiet coffees, long conversations under dim lights. Each moment solidified what had started as a fleeting spark. It was no longer a secret attraction. It had become a shared life, even in its smallest details. One evening, we found ourselves beneath a familiar streetlight, rain softly falling around us. I looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who had entered my life so unexpectedly and had transformed everything. And in that moment, I realized I didn't care anymore about rules, boundaries, or the past. "I don't want this to end," I whispered, my hand finding hers instinctively. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the glow of the street lamp, the rain, and something deeper: hope, trust, maybe love. "It won't," she replied. From that night on, we allowed ourselves to embrace what had been growing quietly for weeks. It wasn't easy, nothing real ever is, but it was ours. Every challenge, every moment of doubt, every stolen glance in the office only strengthened the bond we had formed. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if meeting her was the biggest mistake or the greatest gift of my life. But the answer doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I chose to take the risk, to let myself feel, to let someone in. And in doing so, I discovered that some of the strongest, most unexpected stories begin in the most ordinary places, in the hum of an office, the quiet of a rainy street, and the subtle, transformative power of a hand held at just the right moment. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive.